Okay. Yeah, good afternoon from Barcelona. My name is Patricia Valdenebro. I'm the CEO of the TCI network, and I will moderate today this webinar on sustainability of cluster organizations. This is the second of 3 global webinars that we plan to have in 2019. And for us, the TCI webinars are planned to be virtual discussions with experts from the network, to learn together in an open way about their experiences and also their success and failure stories. We try to identify key topics that are of interest for our TCI members, and also these global webinars complement the webinars in Spanish from our TCI Latin American chapter that we started in 2016 and that we continue offering to our Latin American community. Well, in the first webinar this year, we covered the topic how to incorporate clusters into existing economic development work, and it raised a great interest with more than 130 registrants. And for today, we chose a hot topic, as it is how to make cluster organizations sustainable over time. It's a question that requires a deep thinking, I think, within the management team in the cluster and the companies involved in the decision making of the cluster. And it's also a key topic for those clusters that are growing and that are looking for an international level. It's one of the things that they are going to have to report more on. But it's also important for public administrations, especially for those who want to prepare the clusters they support to have more financial independence, and eventually help them to get ready in case the cluster program is discontinued, something that we see also from time to time. We are lucky to count with 2 great speakers from our network who will share with us about their experience in Nuevo León, in Monterrey, Mexico, and in Upper Austria, from the city of Linz. I welcome Cecilia Carrillo. Hi, Cecilia. Cecilia is cluster manager of CLELAC, the home appliances cluster in Nuevo León. And she is one of the newcomers in our board of directors in TCI. She was elected last year in Toronto by the General Assembly. She represents a growing number of members, cluster organizations that today make up the 18% of TCI membership base. Welcome, Cecilia.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for inviting me to this session.
How long have you been managing the CLELAC cluster, the home appliances cluster in Nuevo León?
Next month, I'm going to be 7 years as a director for the cluster. And previously, I was 3 years in another cluster as a market development manager for the TI cluster here in Mexico, Monterrey, Mexico.
Quite a long time, yeah. Why, if I may, why is it still interesting for you to lead the cluster work there? What do you find interesting after so many years?
For me, it's the network and the people. You know, all organizations, especially clusters, change with people. You know, you can have the same company, but then someone inside the company or the government changes, so all the game changes. And I like that. I like to have different things, different challenges, and movement. That's what I love about clusters.
Excellent. Welcome, Cecilia. And the second speaker is Werner Paminger. Werner is CEO at Business Upper Austria, the business agency of the state of Upper Austria. And he's a well-known expert in cluster management. He established in 1999 the Upper Austrian Plastics Cluster. And he has been responsible for Clusterland Upper Austria, which is a cluster program and community that is considered the model of excellent cluster management in Europe. Werner has been also in the board of directors for a long time now, since 2012, if I am right.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. Welcome, Werner.
Well, thank you very much also for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Great. And we'll welcome to our participants. We have today about 115 registrants for these webinars from 39 different countries. It is a really global meetup. And I want to do a special mention to the big delegation from Mexico, Cecilia, that is joining you today. About 32 registrants from Mexico, and a very special welcome to the cluster manager of the cacao cluster in Mérida, in Venezuela. It's not so usual for us to have participants from Venezuela. Very welcome, and welcome everyone. Yeah. Please, to participants, you can make use of the chat if you want to make comments, questions, or analysis, and I will try to intercalate during the conversation with the speakers. We have asked the speakers to prepare 4 guiding questions. Next slide, please, that you can see now on the screen. And we have 60 minutes to cover all that. By the way, we will be recording this seminar for later dissemination among the members of TCI. Well, so let's start. The first question is how to create revenue streams and a sustainable funding structure for the cluster. And I give the virtual floor to Werner to start with this question.
Well, I mean, you mentioned sustainable, and the question is, how long do you have to be there in order to call it sustainable? In our case, it's actually 21 years that we are doing this kind of cluster activities and cluster-based policies here in the state of Upper Austria. And as you will see later on, we have now 10 cluster organizations within one organization, covering more than 2,200 companies that participate in this kind of cluster activities. What you see on this slide is how it developed over this period, that for us it was quite clear when you talk about sustainability, you talk about the very long-term orientation. In our case, it was very clear that at the beginning, when we started with clusters in Upper Austria, the public side, the government more or less gave an initial financing contribution to this kind of cluster organizations, and they bore the big chunk of the financing the first couple years. That was essential because I'm still quite convinced that at the beginning, most of the times, the companies are not really waiting for you as a cluster organization to come into place. You have to prove that you add value to them. That's why the public side is there to cover this financing streams at the beginning. But, and here comes the essential part of sustainability, for us in our region, the model of private-public partnership is still the model we go and we aim for. It was not just an initial public financing, the chunk of the financial came from the government, but there was also a long-term commitment, and there is still a long-term commitment by the public side to engage in this private-public partnership financing. We are currently financing our clusters on average 75 from the private side and about 25 from the public side. And this goes up and down over time in various classes a little bit because there are projects being added, some disappear, but on average that's where we are, what we are aiming for, and where there is also a long-term commitment by the regional government, because they are convinced that we add actual a lot of value to the regional company. And I will go a little bit more into detail when we talk about which source of private streams and funding streams we have. But that's, I think, is for the moment what we would call a sustainable long-term funding structure of a cluster. Private-public partnership is the key.
Yeah, next slide, please. I think there is also another one.
Yeah. Here you see that when we talk about the revenue stream from the private side, what did we do in terms of where did we derive this the private side. At the beginning, most of the revenues were more or less dedicated to events, seminars, regional marketing activities, contributions by partner organizations. And as time grew, more and more we got into projects and asking companies on the regional sides to pay for project management on regional innovation projects. And as we did this on a regional side, we got more and more into the phase that we did this kind of work also on the national side, on doing trans-regional projects, helping companies to engage in this kind of innovation projects. And just after a couple of years, we were able, I think, to establish our organizations to a maturity level where we could also engage in European funded projects. And you see that here, it is still a small percentage of our revenues that we engage in European funds, but still, I think, at least in our case, if we want to help companies to obtain an innovation leader position in their fields, we need to bring them also to Europe, onto the European scale, to engage with European renowned international universities, and that's where we still do engage quite a bit. And this just shows that you go from like simpler, easier tasks to the more complex, where you are actually asking money for project management activities from the companies over time. And this goes more and more national and then international over time.
Yeah. Can you give us an example of this, what you call the lighthouse tower projects?
Yeah, I can give you, I think I've got also later on a slide, but for example, we in the automotive sector, we derived a project and we developed over time a project where we have now a testing equipment, a testing region for autonomous driving vehicles, where we developed together with regional universities and companies an environment. We got the funding from the private side, mainly from the private side and a little bit public money, for up to 10 million euros to found an own legal entity, that's a limited company, for providing a test bed for autonomous driven vehicles within the region of Upper Austria. And this is what we would call this kind of lighthouse tower project, where we think those issues that we are covering there are very critical for the future success of our companies in terms of innovation, and they have also a certain size where we really can say this is not just a small project, a couple hundred thousand euros involved, but really usually a multi-million euro innovation projects we help to develop.
Mm-hmm. Bernard, there is a question from Emily Weiss. Is the level of public funding to each cluster contingent on certain parameters, including results?
Yes, it is, and it also varies between the different clusters, because, for example, in our furniture and timber construction cluster, we have mainly small and medium-sized companies. The branch structure there is different, so we fund this cluster with probably, I would say, like 70 or 80,000 euros more on average than, for example, an automotive cluster gets. And it also varies much more, not so much on results, but rather on necessities, because projects occur in different time frames on different places. So it's what we do is more or less risk sharing and balancing over time in the through the different funding of the cluster.
Excellent. Let's go to Mexico, Cecilia, to your experience. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I can talk about my experience and some other things, other experiences of my colleagues that I have seen here in Mexico. And what I have prepared for you is information about how I approach certain things and what has worked for me. And the first one is don't be tempted to take everybody's money. At the beginning, of course, all clusters are funded by the government, but as you go ahead, you need other kind of fundings, other streams of revenue. And sometimes trying to look for new members, you get into position that you might want just to get anybody on board. And at the it's very important to make a strategy of who you want to be, who you want to be joining your cluster, and to to analyze who are the key players that will benefit from your mission, from your strategy, so that they are the ones that will be interested in keeping the cluster moving forward. And they are the ones that are going to be paying for either a membership fee or the project, or funding any activities that the cluster might have. So it's very important not to just spread in any way that you might find attractive, but to really keep in mind what's your mission and who should be in your cluster to support it. Mm-hmm. That's at least for me, to keep these steady players with you, because there are movements in companies, or also in the government. They might change priorities, and sometimes they might give you a fund, or maybe next year they will not have enough resources for the clusters. So to keep in mind who is the main benefit, and to keep those players on your side is very important. And in the other way is the diversification can be a trap. And what I mean by that is that not all income is equal. Some projects take more effort than others, more time, and could be more complex. And you have to evaluate if the results really impact the mission and the goals of the cluster and your members. I have seen in my cluster and other clusters that we can get involved in activities to diversify the funds, or diversify the income, but the most important thing is to have a profit, and that profit is not only translates economically, but also is a profit for the members, the main supporters of the cluster, so that you have to move into those high quality, high income, profitable projects or activities that will sustain in the long run the cluster. Especially when you get private funds or big funds for projects, they are the ones that will help you grow and look forward to different kind of stream of revenues, especially if they give you any kind of margin, so that you can create a fund for the cluster. So what has worked very well, at least for me, and for other clusters that I know, is to focus on market failures. Many clusters, like mine, manufacturing clusters, home appliances, we look for market failures that affect many organizations, and because that is a need that affects many. And if you try to organize a project activity to alleviate or reduce that kind of market failure, like the lack of talents, or that there's not enough homogeneous information for everybody, if you focus on that and you make a certain activity that it will keep a margin for the cluster, it will be good for not only the members, the market, the cluster, and you can continue more projects that relate to that picture, market failure, instead of making different ones that are not aligned in the same line of expertise per se. I don't know if I get myself clear on that.
Very clear.
Yes, and but it's very, very good to understand that, you know, all of us have time constraints. So we have to be really careful in which areas we put our effort. So that's why we have to, I like to recommend, and I would always like to analyze, you know, before going into a new project or a new service, or even a new member that I want to attract, you know, how this is going to be helping the cluster of goals, the mission, because sometimes you get involved so much in many activities that are not really part of the core you know, goals that you want to attain.
Thank you, Cecilia. Very important, I think, this part of the finding the right balance, right, between increasing the critical mass and having the right members inside, because this can also create more demand, more costs, and a lower quality of performance in the end. Do you have some way to measure what members are ready to pay for, or what are the things that they value most from the services you provide to them?
Well, you know, I have found three important services that are the ones that they value the most. One is information. You know, everybody likes information, and being the cluster manager, you get many sides of the story that can be helpful for other people. And at the end, information is nothing if you don't take action on it. So, you know, to provide that is very valuable. The other one is the business networking. Business networking allows them to get to know other companies or even other institutions, universities, government, that it will, you know, translate into money if they will, you know, handle it well. Getting to know people is very important to expand your possibilities of business. And the other one is to develop, you know, core competences or training. Everybody wants to know more or be better prepared for their job and their activities. So mainly those three activities that they value most: knowledge, training, and of course business networking.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We go for the next question, please. It's about the suitable mix for public and private funding. Yeah, Werner, your turn.
Yeah, I mean, the question is what is suitable, and it always depends, of course, on your actual situation and on your specific value proposition. What is the overall goal, and what is the overall issue in terms of how do you add value to the cluster? For us, it's quite clear, and it is actually the same for the last 21 years. Our claim is innovation through collaboration, and for us, clusters are there for companies to innovate together. We are not there to provide them with new customers. We are not there to help them to sell their products. We are there to help to innovate, become more innovative through collaboration and working together. And in this scheme, and I put here the information of a typical cluster from us, and this is, for example, of the mechatronics cluster, where we, how do we get the revenues, the private revenues, the 75%, as I mentioned here, from our company members. In the mechatronics clusters, we have around about 300 members in this, and they about 1/4 or 180,000 euros we get through a membership based fee. About the same, about 170,000 we get service fees for project management services and for this kind of project initiation what we do. The other half comes, of course, from conferences conferences, workshops, you name it, also for marketing activities, information materials, and so on. And about another 20% comes from the participation on international fees on international projects, mainly European-based project participation. And this is more or less a typical cluster revenue stream after a certain point of time, after probably 7 to 10 years in operation. And as I mentioned in my first slide, it was, of course, completely different when we started with our cluster activities. But over time, after let's say year 10 or 12 or so, this is, of course, it shifts from time to time, especially the participation in international project. It varies over time quite a bit. For this, we hire people, and then, of course, we lose people again. So we need to be quite flexible in this kind of activities. But this is just, I want to also to give you also the exact numbers and figures what we're talking about, because that you get an idea how more about which kind of funds we do talk here about.
Excellent. Bernard, to have an idea, this is the example for one of the clusters where how many people works, more or less?
There are, I think, 6.5 or 7 persons work there on a permanent basis, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And how many companies are participating?
About 300.
300, yeah, which is quite a big number, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I will get to it later. For us,
yes.
It's quite clear, cluster and cluster management with this narrow focus on innovation. For us, it's quite clear we need to have a certain number of companies, at least a 3-digit figures. We had in the past a few smaller cluster, but with less than 100 members, but it didn't work in our cluster model very well. To get to the point where you really add value through these innovation projects. Mm-hmm. For us, a certain number of companies, a 3-digit figure is essential to be successful in our model.
Great. Bernard, you have a question here. In Upper Austria, the portfolio of cluster organizations are working together to develop services and revenue. We are involved in regional groups of clusters of 6-7 clusters working together in these issues. What would you recommend regional groups of independent cluster organizations working together on service, development, sustainability to do? Short-term or long-term?
Of course, long-term, but it's not always very easy when you have different organizations covering different cluster initiatives. This will be one of my next slides, our big advantage is that all these cluster organizations are in one organization, in one legal entity. They're not even in one legal entity, they're also on one floor in one building. They share one coffee machine. They meet a couple times a day. And even there, it's not so easy to, there is a lot of common activities, and collaboration is easy when you meet on a regular basis a couple of times. But even there, it's not so easy to share revenues from common activities. And we had the situation that in former days, for example, the food cluster was not part of our organization, but it was part of the Chamber of Commerce. And of course, we got along very well. But we saw that collaboration was not so easy. Now, for 2 years ago, it was also merged into our organization, and now we see how much more easier it became to work together on a real value-added basis when you are within one legal entity, and all the persons have one employer.
Mm-hmm. Great. Cecilia, yeah, you go with your slide.
Yeah, for for me, was the suitable mix. At the end, always, as I put it, find your hero, the 80-20 principle. At the beginning, everything is the government who supports, but then when you move, you have to try to keep out from the government and try to diversify your funds. But maybe it's very important to analyze that that 20% of your members, that could be the government or that could be companies, universities, are the ones that are going to give you 80% of your funds. And it's very important for you to keep every year trying to analyze from where your money is coming, because and try to focus on the organizations that are more reliable and more that are willing to give you those kind of funds for your services or activities. So because sometimes we try to reach out to certain funds or certain players in the cluster that they are not really that committed, and there will be just a fund or a participation in the cluster that it will just be for a one-time activity, but they will not continue. So we have to always focus on the organizations or companies, members that will continue with the cluster, and those are your 20%. They could be 10, they could be 30, depends, but just keep in mind that you have to focus on those. And of course, the second one, avoid reliability on changing or uncertain funds. That is, if I have seen and I have experienced that, we want to, get certain funding or income or revenue for a government entity or certain sponsors. But if you know that they are going to be changing either the leader, the person, or the priorities, try to move to other areas, because if you rely your budget on that, you're going to have difficulties in the future. And I think the third one that is the most important, never stop looking for new members. New members are the key of getting the cluster bigger and to maintain its activities from the long term. So that's why it's very important to, even though you're looking for funds elsewhere or creating new activities, for me at least, the key is always getting new organizations, new companies in industries that into the cluster that are committed and willing to participate.
Excellent. Thank you, Cecilia. We move to next question. We are nearly half our time. And the next question is, what is a perfect business model for a cluster organization? Here we go deep into the picture, the right photo that we can imagine for the cluster.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely, of course, the most difficult question to generalize, because this really depends on your situation, your overall economic situation, your system of government, your system of public-private collaboration, and you can add this list. What I can tell and what really is working for us for actually more than 20 years now is that we have this one organization where all different clusters are more or less departments in this one legal entity, and there is a lot of cross-cluster collaboration and a lot of cross-cluster innovation, actually, especially in the last couple of years, we see through this organization. And in former days, this organization, this cluster organization was a single entity, a limited liability company. It was included, and it is actually nowadays the core of our, and I put the organizational chart of our regional development agency there, that this is actually the core of the regional development agency of the state of Upper Austria, is the cluster department with its 10 cluster organizations. 65% of our staff of the whole agency are actually within the cluster organization. We serve as a company around about 3,000 companies per year on a regional basis. 2,300 of them are members in the cluster department, and they are serviced by the cluster department. So this is more or less our key accounting organization, key accounting department for all other matters there in the regional development agency, despite that their core business is innovation through collaboration. They just do innovation projects, more or less nothing else. They're not in charge of foreign direct investment. They are not in charge of innovation funding. They are not in charge of any other policy making activities on a regional basis. Their task is innovation through collaboration. And through this single entity, through the high degree of self-financing, those despite being just departments in this bigger agency, they are quite independent when it comes to their decision-making capabilities. They have all their own specific advisory boards. They have their own budget. They don't have to give money to anyone else or to cross subsidize other clusters. They are their own more or less accounting structure. And for us, actually, I can just tell this is working now for 21 years, and at the moment, I mean, you can never say anything about the future, but for those 21 years, there wasn't any doubt about getting rid of clusters at all or changing it substantially, because 2,300 companies involved there actually make it different for regional economic policies.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Cecilia, please.
Yes. Well, I don't think there's a perfect business model. I think it will depend on the industry and of course, why the reason that the cluster was created. For example, as Werner was saying, you know, a lot of clusters in Austria and especially in Europe, they focus on innovation, and there's other clusters in other parts of the world, like in Mexico, Latin America, that we are trying to understand how to work together and add value to develop or grow the industry. And some areas are not as mature to just focus on innovation. But at least what I have seen and what works for cluster is that all these kind of organizations have to be lean. That is, not to have that many employees in the payroll, because then your fixed costs are going to kill you in the long run. So you have to be efficient and effective. What that means is that you have to make use of little resources to have a high impact results. As all small and medium companies in the world, I think is very important to understand this, that to have big results, you don't need a big staff just to be a really efficient and effective staff that target the goals that you are trying to acquire or to attain. And also these small groups, it will be more difficult or will take more time to develop services and activities by yourself. So that's very important to develop alliances. There are many things and many persons that already have the knowledge, the experience, especially the universities or certain consultants. So try to find as a cluster what is valuable or what is good or will benefit the industry, the members, and try to make an alliance. Not to start, to start from scratch, because sometimes it will take you longer to be there. So the perfect business model of a cluster will be small people trying to collaborate with many organizations to reach what they want to go. And then the third one, what I have suggested is that you have to go where the knowledge and the money is. At the end, you know, there are many organizations that offer the same, and it's important to get the information, the innovation of whatever is valuable for the industry, what are the trends, and that's where the money is. Plus, that's where the services or the activities that the members would value, because there's supposed to be that is on explore, is something new, and if you try to work on those kind of areas, it will be at the beginning might be risky. Certain of them might not understand, but there's always a champion. There's always a hero that will give you the vote of confidence, and sometimes even the funds to start those kinds of activities.
There's a next slide, I think. Yeah.
Oh, and I have, yes, on that case, I prepare other two things. That is that you always have to remember your purpose, you know, in your business model. Don't try to, you know, move too far from it, because at the end, clusters is about people, connecting people. And even if you are in other parts of the world, we can connect through the internet, only part of not the world, the region. But it is important to always understand and ask around, you know, what is that the players of the cluster one, the core players. Who are the core players? The ones that pay the cluster to move forward, because you are going to have many other people around, what I call cheerleaders, that they will, you know, try to motivate and give you information, or try to, you know, try to participate in the cluster, but at the end, they are not key players. They are not helping the cluster. But you have to always remember that they can distract the players. Cheerleaders, they have, you know, many distractants that can avoid, so you have to always attend them and try to keep them on board. But just to get back to the question, you have to remember your purpose, ask around, ask the members, the government, universities, you know, try to get a feel of what's going on, and always, you know, step aside, try to analyze your information and see what is the most valuable, to see what is the best data to develop your plan. And then, of course, take action. You have to move and take action, and then try to analyze again what, you know, the results of what you have done, because business models also can change. And that's why you have to keep, you know, be aware of the possible impacts of your business model. You can start from what a certain amount of companies need in year one, but then as you grow and you get more members, or the industry changes, then your business model might need certain adjustments. And in that case, what I have identified is that, of course, for the business model, one of the impacts is time constraints. Time constraints because everybody has many activities, and they cannot give you all the time you need on certain projects that you want them on their opinion or expertise. But for that, we have webinars, we have, you know, even WhatsApp. Now I'm dealing and making negotiations through WhatsApp. So you have to find ways to connect and to get in what you want. Also, is the industry, you know, the industry changes. You have to be, you know, keep on that. What is going to happen for the automotive industry if all, you know, cars are going to be electric? So everybody has to be on their feet trying to see where the industry is moving. And of course, generational differences. Now, clusters and organizations, you have different people of different generations that they behave differently. The interests are different. And younger people want a return on their investment or their participation in the cluster or their fee, as the older generation, not as old, of course, but that they are more willing to collaborate for a higher goal of the group. And you have to keep in mind that as cluster move, also the mix of ages move is different, and that impacts the decision making of what kind of activities are valuable or not. The fourth one is competition. There are many organizations out there that sometimes you translap, or you make certain activities that are the same. So you have to try to stay different or give the value to your members, and try to avoid copying others, just to, find your game and play well in it. And of course, technology. Technology always is a disrupt, or is a facilitator for the communication, or even a business model.
Thank you, Cecilia. Yeah, let's go to the challenges of finding private funding sources. I'm sure here you have many good and bad examples, or success and failure stories. Could you share with us some of them, Werner?
Well, for us, I mean, the key issue for finding private sources is, of course, you need to add value to the companies. And in our case, it might be completely different in other places, but in our case, of course, at the beginning, companies are suspicious. Can this cluster management actually add value to my needs? And that's why the public side was more or less financing the initial phase. For us nowadays, we get for our 10 clusters, around about 2 million euros from the public side. And our cluster department is generating around about 7.2 million euros out of those 2 million from the private side. So 5.2 million comes added from the private side. And in this structure, for us, it's quite clear that when you ask companies for money, you need to add value through, in our case, mainly project management activities. And our staff is more or less highly engaged with the companies on a day-to-day basis. We have in total around about 65 to 70 persons, and they do around about 2,200, between 2,000 and 2,200 company visits per year. If you are asking money from the companies for project management activities, you need to be on the corporate level, because in our structure, and it's stated here, 81% of our companies are small and medium-sized companies. Or give a different figure, 65% of those 2,300 companies have between 50 and 150 employees. That's a very typical company size in our environment. And there it is about not focusing too much on the very small companies in our case, but on the mid-size companies that are capable of differentiating themselves through the stake of innovation from their competitors. And that is more or less what we do with a very long-term orientation, because we cannot, if the companies are not happy with what we do here in Upper Austria, we cannot move to Germany, to Italy, to a different place. So the market, it's always the same. We need to deal with our customers also tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. So we really need to work with them on a very long-term base. And the issue of building stable relationships, it's a key issue when we do this kind of cluster management in Upper Austria.
Excellent. Thank you. And Cecilia?
Well, for me in this case, I will share for you the experience that sometimes company they don't have the same perspective of what they need and what they want. It's different. Sometimes the industry needs something, but the company wants something completely different. They want to sell, they want to be bigger, they want more clients, and the industry needs more, I don't know, certifications or more talent or something like that. So to have the mix to try to have everybody happy sometimes is difficult. but good projects that target industry needs. If you make them understand that, they will almost always be funded by the members, by companies, but because at the end they are the ones that will be benefit. So everybody expects a return on their investment, and a way of doing that is that translating the activity, the projects, into benefit for the companies that are going to be at the end the ones that gain something from such. So sometimes you have to segment your companies. If you have many, if you have small, just you will have 2 or 3 segments of what they need. Because in my case, I have big companies, and I have medium and family-owned companies, which also behave very differently from the others. And it is important to understand what's the need of each of them, what they want, and what of those will have the highest impact on the industry. Because sometimes if you focus a lot, especially in my industry, if I focus a lot in maybe the small companies, those kind of activities might not have as the biggest impact that we wish they had, because the composition of our industry is more large and medium-sized companies. At the end is, we have to focus on the needs, on what is the important things. It's not just to work on something that is trendy or suddenly some available funds, and let's create a project of innovation because everybody is doing that. It will be harder to find the money for that. You have to talk to people and understand what they want, and then elaborate the fund according to that project. People will identify with the need and the project if you explain it correctly, and of course it targets exactly their industry or the kind of company.
Do you have a concrete example that you can share with us, that's something that didn't work, what you really thought at the beginning it could be of impact or useful for the cluster and finally didn't?
I have many, but one that I remember, when I entered the cluster, I was fairly new. I came from another cluster, but it was a TI cluster, and it was different. In here is a manufacturing cluster, so people are more practical, and they always expect an outcome and a result. And at the end, what everybody was doing, I thought we should, start doing was to develop suppliers. And developing suppliers for an industry is a wide different kind of activities. And is not that it was wrong, it's just the first one that I chose to start with is not what they wanted, is what they needed, but they didn't want to do that. That's the difference. Because a family-owned company, a small or medium company, they will, because they made their own company, they don't want, or they don't think they need certain tools or knowledge because they are, they are where they are because they started the company. But when you have to first gain their trust, show them what's going on around, so that and make them understand. You need certain qualifications, and you need certain certifications to either be a supplier or just stay in the game, because they will, choose another one and you will be out. So it's more, you have to be more on the political side, try to talk to everybody and show them what's the benefit on participating, for them to understand that what they want is not necessarily what they need. So my first my first approach on supplier development was a total failure, because I was offering what I was told by the big company or what they needed, but the small company didn't want wanted that because they just wanted more bigger and more business. And I had to work on trying to compensate one with the other, or try to get the information, explain better all that to the companies, so that we can develop a program that was useful for both of them, for the big one and the small company. So at the end, it's also communicating, gathering people around, trying to explain things on their level or the way they want to understand, so that you can compromise the both sides.
Great, excellent. And we go to the last slide, which is what kind of added value services should a well-established cluster offer? Yeah.
I see.
Yeah, I think, Werner, you didn't prepare a slide, but I'm sure you have many things to comment. Let's go to the
well, I can. Yeah, I just make it very brief, since I think we are also short on time. It's you need, of course, companies want to sell more and earn more. But usually we as a cluster organization, we cannot help them finding new customers or finding better paying customers. But we can help them to become more competitive in order to do it themselves. And they become more competitive through being more innovative. And this is more or less what we try to do. And I think this is at least where we are from and what we focus is. This is the one and only well-established service is providing service innovation project-based services in order to be more innovative, not just as a single company, but as a group of companies. This is more or less what we do, and that what we've been trying to do for many years.
Easy to say, not to do.
Easy to say, and a very hard thing to do, and it takes quite a long time that the companies actually go for it.
Okay, Cecilia.
Well, the kind of other value services will be always aligned to the mission. I have met once an organization was organizing a concert just to gain money, and it's nothing to have, nothing to do with you. So your activities have to be aligned to your mission, and you, especially to your core members, the paying members that are committed, that participate. Of course, to their needs, and then you create value. Of course, there are services that have higher value than others, but try to focus on which ones that are going to give you a momentum, how you want to be remembered. If your cluster disappears today, what is what you are going to leave to all the companies that participate, what they will think of you. That you did a conference, a trade show, you make them business or a new technology, and that's you have to be always keep thinking of that. And the other one is to combine innovation and business, because those are the kind of added value projects that will remain and they will remember and will give them an advantage for the future. Is not easy to do. You can put everything on paper. It's very hard to do, but at the end, everything is possible if you put good effort. And what I have identified to make a good strategy is to always understand where your income comes, who are the main players of your cluster, who has the money, and try to develop your plan to growth, where you want to be, how you want to be remembered, and try to accommodate, a path, or where have you been and where you want to go, I don't say 5 years, because things change very quickly, but at least, 2 or 3 years of how you have to move to get where you go. It's easier to go to a place where you already know you want to be, than just to go with the flow to see where, the life takes you. And of course, develop the services according to the member needs, never forgetting what they want, but the needs are the ones that will keep you in your place and, give you long-term profits. And always evaluate the risk of a new service, because sometimes they will ask you to do something that will take you, maybe like in my cluster, we are only 4 people. And, how much time and effort is going to take me to have this kind of new service how many companies will benefit from it, is it really worth it? Or maybe there's a smaller project that will benefit more. So you always have to evaluate not only the risk of if it is going to fail or not, because you're always going to be learn something, but how much time is going to take you that it will, take time from other kind of activities that are more valuable. But of course, the last one, never be afraid to try. I have especially one project that for me was really risky. I thought no one was going to participate with. We did it anyway. And right now is one of the, higher added value for our companies. So we took the risk. Because it was not, it didn't involve a lot of money. It was some time of effort and time, but we have many volunteers and collaborators to it. So, you always have a plan and try to move with the changes.
Excellent. Thank you very much. This was great conversation. We take some more minutes after 4 here in Central European time to go with the conclusions. Werner.
Well, those are the conclusions of 20 years experience here in Austria. Our conclusion, and I mentioned that we also had to close down or merge cluster organizations because they were not real strongholds of the region. They were more or less some wishes of politicians, policymakers. Of course, who doesn't want to have a life sciences industries in their region? But if there is no regional strength, you cannot create a cluster through this. So you need to be really, really honest with yourself. And for us, as I mentioned, the absolute number of companies in a sector and in a region really counts. If we do not have a 3-digit figure with our business model of innovation, it was just not working to create the spirit and to create the number of projects, innovation projects we need to have. The second point I want to make is we also learned that there is the need of a real cluster in terms of a real value, of a regional value chain. We have probably 3,000 bakery shops here in the region of Upper Austria, but we don't have a bakery shop cluster because there isn't a real value chain added in there. And we have just 250 plastics companies in that region where there is the value chain. So you need to have a certain level of depth in this value chain in order to go that you have added benefits from working together. As I mentioned before, for us, it worked very well that we have this one agency principle. This economies of scale and the cross-cluster innovation is key to our model of doing cluster management, and you do not get distracted if you have other things in your organization. When you have, for example, a university institute managing a cluster, you have always a fallback or organization and a fallback option. If it's not working, okay, then we do what we did before. Long-term orientation is key to what we do. We saw there are just very little quick wins, and it takes quite a long time, almost a decade, to see real outcomes of cluster activities. That's sometimes hard to explain to politicians who want to see the real results within one legal period of their election periods. And when we're talking about people and people management, it's about perspective for cluster management and their staff. If they have a 3-year period of cluster funding, in the first year, they will try to develop the cluster. In the second year, they will try to find future fundings after year 3, and in year 3 they will look for a new job. That's not how you do cluster management. It takes a long-term perspective in order to get also good stuff and to keep it, and to get also the tacit knowledge and the relationships you need to do a proper job there. And for us, private-public partnership worked quite well as a sustaining model for cluster management.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you, Werner. And recommendations from Cecilia.
Yes, very quickly. Know your members and what they value. It's very important to, get in the field and understand what they need, what they want. Always look for more members and committed members that are aligned to your mission, not any kind of company, just the ones that really will support you and identify with what you're doing. Be aware of the impacts for your cluster, what can change, and that is political, economical, or technological. What's going on around that might change your business model, the structure, even your members, your membership, how is going to be changing that. Mm-hmm. And use your time and effort wisely. What is the constraint of all of us is time, so we have to choose where we put our time and effort.
Excellent. Thank you very much, both. I think this was a very interesting conversation around an interesting topic. We have still some questions pending, but we will send you the contacts from Cecilia and Werner. They are always at your disposal if you want to follow the conversation bilaterally. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you all for taking part in this webinar. We will share with you the information from the webinar, the recording, and the presentation as well. And we are preparing a nice surprise that hopefully will get to you also. And our next meeting place will be face-to-face in October in Antwerp on the 8th to 10th of October. And it will be our global conference where we hope you can all participate. We remind you that the early bird fee is open until the 30th of June. Take advantage, and we're looking forward to continuing our conversation there. Thank you very much, everyone.
Well, thank you very much, and looking forward to going back to you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.